Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I rise to address this matter of urgency moved by Senator McKim, and I'd like to address the points that they raise, several briefly, and then I'll go into some detail. So one of the points is that this is abandoning our sovereignty. Having worked in defence for many years, in fact run our flight test centre, I'm aware of the fact that for many of our systems we have a deep reliance on the original equipment manufacturer, from issues to do with software, spiral upgrade programs, and it is almost impossible, for example with the Joint Strike Fighter, that absent the combined logistic support system that we could operate that. So this no more decreases or throws away our sovereignty than many of the systems that we are purchasing, because the cost to develop and own a system completely here in Australia would absorb more of the budget than Australians would be prepared to fund. Secondly, in terms of destabilising the region, one of the key reasons you have a strong defence force is in fact for deterrence, so that we keep the peace. History tells us if you want to deter an authoritarian regime from taking action, you need to A, have a strong capability, and B, demonstrate clear intent that you are prepared to stand up and defend what is in your nation and your people's interests. And the brief that is put together by the Congressional Research Service that actually informed the members of the US Congress to support and vote for the NDAA, which authorises the AUKUS deal, highlights in there that selling the Virginia-class boats to Australia would substantially enhance deterrence of potential Chinese aggression, particularly around North Asia, the Taiwan Strait, in our region. So far from destabilising the region, this would actually enhance stability in our region. Now, why is that important? And this is the third point I'll come to. Senator McKim's motion talks about $360 billion. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but you've got to remember when defence costs these projects, they look at the out dollars over a period, and 30 years is the period which is involved here. So that's about 0.15% of GDP looking over those 30 years. Just to put it in context, $360 billion over those 30 years, we spend around $220 billion each year just on the welfare budget. And looking at the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare figures, on average that's around 10% of GDP. So 10% of GDP versus 0.15% of GDP. And why is stability important? If we look at analysis by David Uren, who's one of Australia's premier economists, into the impact of tensions and a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, he highlights that the detriment to the Australian economy would be a long-term decrease of 6% of GDP and a reduction of 14% of per capita income, even if Australia wasn't involved in the conflict, just if the conflict occurred. So this is an investment of 0.15% of GDP so that we maintain deterrence, to maintain the status quo, to avoid conflict, and that is something that will keep Australia's economy healthy to the tune of nearly 6% of GDP. So when you look at that cost figure, you've got to understand that this is actually a sensible long-term decision to have a strong military capability that acts as a deterrent. And to the final point of Senator McKim's motion, and as Senator Shoebridge described, there are bottlenecks in the American system at the moment. And in fact, the US has decided that as part of managing their capability, they need to invest, and they're looking to invest some $11 billion increasing the capacity at the two shipyards, General Dynamics and Hunting and Ingalls Industries, that make the Virginia. But they've realised that if they just keep placing in orders and there's already a backlog, then they're committing funds against something that cannot be delivered. And so the detailed analysis of that decision is that they've accepted reality. Yes, there is a backlog. And so they said, we won't put the funding in against another vessel because the reality is it won't suddenly pop out, but we will invest $11 billion over a period to actually lift the capacity of those shipyards to reach the $2.33 that Senator Shoebridge referred to. So far from being a waste of money, this is actually investment in the stability of our region, in our sovereign capability, in partnership with like-minded nations to preserve the interests of Australia and our people.